Welcome back to this live broadcast of the First General Congregation of the second session of the 16th General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops. We have just had a half-hour break. In the first half, we heard Cardinal Mario Grech, the Secretary General, speaking. And soon we will hear from Cardinal Jean-Claude Hollerich, who is the General Rapporteur. And before we open this session, as you will have heard, it is somebody's birthday, and so they wish them so.
Good afternoon. Seems right to me to begin with a cordial welcome to those, not many, who have joined us at the second session without having participated in the first. I hope you have felt welcomed. But I move forward right away with an equally cordial welcome back to all those who are here for the second time. It was good to meet you again. It is a sign that familiarity and friendship have indeed grown amongst us, and that the past year has not erased them. So here we are again. The faces of those around us are familiar. The hall is the same, and so are the tables. As far as I'm concerned, even the place is the same as last year. My place is the same as last year. Although some tables have been moved, I believe I'm not the only one in this situation. This helps us to feel at home, but perhaps not to realize something very important. The second session is not a repetition or a mere continuation of the first, where we are called to take a step forward. This is what the people of God expect from this Synodal Assembly. So I thought that at this time it might be useful for us to reflect on what is different between the first and the second session, so that we are better in tune with our new task. The objective of the second session, well, the first difference, well, the main one, is the purpose of the two sessions, which also defines the nature of our being together and our exchanges. The aim of the first session was to allow us to get to know each other, but above all, to allow each of us to gain a better knowledge of the churches from which the others come, their situation, the way they live their mission, the priorities of their action, their concerns, and their questions regarding synodality. We might say that in the first session we were called to look at each other through each other's eyes. It was a fascinating, sometimes challenging journey that brought out the many differences that the Church has. Differences of language, of culture, of traditions, of gender, differences of condition, and led us to recognize them as a strength and as a gift of God. As stated in the Instrumentum Laboris for the second session, and I quote, "The experience of the pluralism of cultures and the fruitfulness of the encounter and dialogue between them is a condition of the Church's life, not a threat to her Catholicity." Starting from that experience, and full of wonder and gratitude, for the richness that the Spirit gives to the Church, in this second session, we are instead called to focus our gaze, or rather to discern together where to turn it, indicating possible trajectories of growth along which to invite the churches to walk. The aim is that those riches do not stay locked in a coffer, but become part of the exchange of gifts that nourishes the communion of the Church as a whole. The main question for this second session invites us precisely to this, how to be a synodal church in mission. And the Pope asked us to add the attribute merciful. All the churches in the world are consulted on this. The Instrumentum Laboris for the second session, on which our work in the coming weeks is going to be based, offers us a summary of what we as a church have learned along the path of these 3 years. For those who know what I'm referring to, we are borrowing the metaphor of a liqueur like grappa. Significantly, its title reproposes the guiding question of the second session, how to be a synodal church in mission, dropping the question mark. This clarifies what are the steps that we must take together as an assembly. So here we come to the second important difference. When you received the Instrumentum Laboris for the second session, I'm sure you have realized at first sight how different it is from the one that was prepared for the first session. The Instrumentum Laboris is different because our task is different. The Instrumentum Laboris for the first session was a collection of questions, in particular in the working sheets. It invited us to challenge and, above all, to give answers to a number of questions that mainly regarded the story and the experience of our churches. Quite different is the Instrumentum Laboris for the second session. The question mark appears approximately 10 times compared to the over 300 in the previous one. I took the time to count them. I took the trouble to count them because it seems to me a good indication of the step forward that the second session is called to take, and a clear invitation to focus on all our attention in one direction. In the service of our effort, the text of the Instrumentum Laboris for the second session sums up what we may consider the main assumptions that we have agreed on during the synodal process with respect to the topics addressed. The experts who collaborated in its drafting, and I would like to thank them for their efforts. Many of them are here today, not all of them though, started from the synthesis report of the first session and the results of the second consultation of the local churches. But they also referred to previous documents. In addition, they considered the fruits of the international meeting Parish Priests for the Synod, about which we have already heard a testimony, and the materials produced by the 5 working groups set up by the General Secretariat of the Synod. In order to make good use of the Instrumentum Laboris, it is necessary to focus on its nature. It is not a draft of the final document that simply needs a few amendments. rather a collection of the results of a process that is our task to discern. It is up to this assembly to indicate where to lay stress or what to underline, because maybe we are talking about something particularly important. It is also up to us to discuss what needs to be elaborated on and rephrased or reformulated. Above all, it is up to us to give a sort of direction in which we feel the Spirit is asking the whole Church to proceed, entrusting the Holy Father with guidelines and perspectives for the implementation phase. The differences in the instrumentum laboris of the two sessions reflect also differences in the working method. Of course, we will still have group work, the so-called circuli minoris, and plenary sessions, the general congregations. But compared to last year, the dynamics of both will change. I think you've realized it by reading the information on the working method. The document is titled How We Will Work Together. There's still time to read it, if you haven't. Well, you received this document in the past few weeks, and also the rules of procedure. The working groups will continue to follow the method of conversation in the Spirit, but with some changes to adapt to the specific objective of the session. You will be given more accurate indications tomorrow morning. Our facilitators have undergone 3 days of training, and thank you for devoting time to this activity to accompany us as best they can. And also for our plenary work, we will be given additional information. Here I would like to stress the choice of giving more focus on our exchanges. Therefore, in each of the 4 modules that will become familiar to us starting from tomorrow, the first task of the Assembly will be to approve the order in which the topics will be addressed during the many hours. For 3 modules, there will be as many as 9 of plenary sessions, starting from a list that will be the product of group work. We have asked the delegated presidents to play a proactive role in helping us not to deviate from these priorities, the priorities that we ourselves will approve. And for this, they too have undergone special training. Thank you very much.
Più facile.
But their task will be easier if everyone helps them by exercising a little self-discipline. In any case, there will be time for contributions or for interventions on topics that the Assembly has not included among their priorities. There's one last difference I would like to stress. Last year, our Assembly was the only body that, at the level of the Universal Church, carried forward the reflection on synodality by practicing the synodal method. This is no longer happening this year. We have the 10 study groups established by decision of the Holy Father in February. These 10 groups are first and foremost the first concrete fruit of our work. According to the Holy Father, in fact, the synthesis report of the first session illustrates many important theological questions, all of which are to varying degrees related to the synodal renewal of the Church, and not without juridical and pastoral repercussions. These issues, by their very nature, require in-depth study, since it is not possible to carry out this study during the second session. We have only 4 weeks. They will be the responsibility of specific study groups, so that they may be properly examined. In other words, by establishing these groups, the implementation of our Assembly's recommendations has already begun. This also applies, and I would like to stress this in particular, to the working method of these groups. When he established them, the Holy Father also established that they should work according to a genuinely synodal method, entrusting the Secretary General of the Synod with the task of ensuring that this is indeed the case. This explains, for example, the composition of these groups. The dicasteries of the Roman Curia that are relevant on the various topics are represented, along with pastors, experts of different geographical origin, of different condition, men and women, priests, consecrated men and women, laymen and lay women, and with different vocational skills. The General Secretariat of the Synod actively participated in the launch of these groups and continues to follow their work, ensuring their coordination with the synodal process. They are actual laboratories of synodality from which we will learn. In this sense, these 10 groups are also our interlocutors, and we will focus the time that is left this afternoon to establish a dialogue with them. We will invite a representative from each of the 10 groups to update us on the program that they have set out. We will do this in the context of a quick review of the contents of the 4 sections of our Instrumentum Laboris, which obviously correspond to the themes of the first 4 modules of this assembly. We will thus discover how closely our work and that of the 10 groups are intertwined. In synodal style, I will therefore not be the only one to speak during the General Rapporteur's report, but it's good for you. Well, this dialogue may continue in the coming weeks, since, as you will see, many members of the 10 groups are taking part in the work of the second session under different capacities. Let's start. The Instrumentum Laboris for the second session opens with the prophet Isaiah's vision of the Messianic banquet. It thus reminds us that to his disciples, the risen Lord entrusts the task of reaching out to all peoples, to serve them a banquet made of food that gives fullness of life and joy. The mission is the horizon of the Synodal Church. The text is then divided into 4 sections. In the first 4 modules of our work, we will focus on each of them, as it will be better explained tomorrow. For this evening, I will just limit myself to highlighting the connections with the 10 study groups. The first section is entitled Foundations. It outlines the horizon within which to place the elaboration of the answers to the guiding question, making an explicit reference to the theological points that have gradually consolidated in recent years. It is in this context that the Instrumentum Laboris recalls the work of study group number 10, the reception of the fruits of the ecumenical journey in the people of God. His Excellency Monsignor Paul Ruana, Auxiliary Bishop of Joubert, Sarba, Engineer of the Maronites, coordinator, will tell us about it. I would like to remind all those who will be speaking that they have 3-4 minutes tops after the short introduction video. To all of them, I would like to express our gratitude for their work.
This was particularly evident during the first session of the Synodal Assembly. This was preceded by a profound ecumenical gesture involving the vigil prayer, Together, gathering of the people of God. In the course of the assembly itself, in addition, there was the participation of a significant number of fraternal delegates. This is because the synodal process has highlighted a strong call to foster ecumenism. Baptism, which is at the root of the principle of synodality, constitutes the foundation of ecumenism. Furthermore, the challenges of today's world require us to foster our unity at the service of mission. We are called to unity, learning from one another through the exchanges of gifts. Entrusted with reflection on the theme, the reception of the fruits of the ecumenical journey in ecclesial practices, Group 10 has to explore these questions. What is the link between synodality and primacy? And what about the issue of Eucharistic hospitality and the phenomenon of non-denominational communities and Christian-inspired revival movements?
Groupe d'études 10, la réception des fruits du chemin.
Group 10, the reception of the fruits of the ecumenical praxis along the synodal process during the local consultation and local and continental assemblies in October 2023, the call to go beyond the journey of unity and ecumenical relations has become more and more urgent. Number 2, Instrumentum Laboris, you can read that one of the most significant fruit of Synod 21-24 is the intensity of the ecumenical impulse and the promise that marks it. That is paragraph 107, to continue journey and to continue with the ecumenical journey and to give visibility to the unity visible for all Christians. That is paragraph 9. we feel synodality more and more and more. And our study group has to analyze the reception of the fruits of the ecumenical journey in ecclesial practices concerning three specific questions, which have been stated in the video. We have started with 2 online meetings, and we will have also another meeting in person to set up a work plan and a timeline and to establish 3 subgroups working on 3 specific subjects or topics. First question, our group recognize the interconnection at national and international level within the Church, and it focuses in the whole Church. We want to make an in-depth study of synodality and primacy at the universal level. We base ourselves on the document, the Bishop of Rome, and the responses to this document, which the other churches will send, as well as the Christian communion will send to the dicastery for the unity of Christians, basing ourselves on the discernment of the Assembly of 2024 and Interventum Laboris number 2. We want to draft a practical question of the exercise of the Petrine ministry in this light, that is a new ecumenical framework, and explore the potential elements for ecumenical synodal process rooted in our baptism. Issue number 2. Communicatio in Sacris, the Eucharistic hospitality. Our second topic, the Eucharistic hospitality. We would like to specify the terms, the terminology, communicatio in sacris, that is to widen it to the sacramental life, keeping in mind local pastoral realities marked by a growing ecumenism. Our approach is together experiences from concrete situations in different contexts. We will focus on the needs of mixed families with different denominations, ecumenical situations. We will examine bilateral agreements. Topic number 3, our third topic, the phenomenon of non-denominational communities and Christian-inspired revival movements, is to see in a positive light what we can learn from our brothers in a spirit of exchange of gifts, in a constructive commitment for a wider Christian family. We want to give a priority to the contribution of local churches and help people understand the sensus fidei in the different local contexts. The first stages concern the consultation of the dicastery for Christian unity and see the feedback and reflections to these 3 main issues, especially as a considering the document, with reactions to the document entitled The Bishop of Rome. Thank you very much. The Instrumentum Laboris now mentioned group number 2, listening to the cry of the poor. We have now Miss Sandy Cornish, Australian. She's from Australia and she is the coordinator.
Today, about 700 million people live in extreme poverty. Many more are suffering from other forms of poverty, including solitude, ignorance, and despair. We can even hear the cry of the earth.
La povertà è uno scandalo La povertà è uno scandalo.
The service of charity to the poor is a constitutive element of the Church's mission and an indispensable expression of her very being. All the faithful have the right and duty to devote themselves personally to living the new commandment of universal love that Christ left us, and to offering our contemporaries not only material assistance, but also refreshment and care for their souls. The Church must take sides with the poor. It must listen to them and accompany them. How can the Church listen more and learn more from the poor to serve them better?
The members of Study Group 2 live and work in Asia, Africa, Latin America, Oceania, Europe, North America. Our work is really just beginning. The Synod documents so far describe the faces of many groups made poor, marginalised, or who are suffering. But there are gaps. For example, some historically excluded groups, such as Afro-descendants and victims of caste discrimination, are yet to be called by their names. Furthermore, orientations for action are also lacking, and so that's our work. We have begun to reach out to members, ministries and agencies of the Church whose daily work is responding to the cry of the earth and the cry of those made poor. We hope to share examples of good practice that might inspire others. However, we know that what is currently being done has not prevented some people and groups from feeling unheard by the Church. It has not yet eradicated poverty, exclusion, injustice or suffering. So the answer may not be to simply do more of the same. We have reached out to those bishops with special responsibility for justice, ecology and peace within their bishops' conferences, and we've learned from them of many obstacles faced by local churches as they try to respond to the cry of the earth and of those who are suffering. Such obstacles call for creative and innovative responses. We hope to offer concrete proposals to help the Church to be more effective in the social dimension of its mission. Our proposals will be informed by the experience of the Church in different contexts. Such proposals also need to be able to be interpreted and given flesh in diverse realities. We have begun to reach out to theologians and formators to explore how theological research can listen to what the poor and the earth have to teach us, how formation for social mission may be improved, and how a spirituality of justice, ecology and peace can sustain this work. Some dimensions of our response might include encounter with its intentional and active listening, the provision of services, policy and advocacy work, a spirituality of justice, ecology and peace, and integral formation for social mission. Developing tools and processes for social discernment is one possibility that seems promising. I'm here at the Assembly as a facilitator, so please take the opportunity to come and talk to me if you have questions. Thank you. 3 minutes?
Grazie, dottoressa.
Thank you very much. The Instrumentum Laboris, the foundations follow 3 closely interwoven parts which illuminates from different perspectives the missionary synodal life of the Church. The first perspective is that of relations with the Lord among brothers and sisters and among churches, sustaining the vitality of the church far more radically than its structure. Among the themes of this section, there is the exchange of gifts among churches. Study group number 1 reflects particularly on some aspects of the relations between Eastern Catholic churches and the Latin Church. Now we listen to the presentation by His Eminence, Most Reverend Cardinal Geraldi, Prefect for the Dicastery for Eastern Churches.
Migration, war, unemployment, climate change are reshaping the world. The Church, too, is affected by these phenomena. For centuries, Eastern and Latin traditions have coexisted in many countries. This coexistence is rather new in some others. Synodality asks for more than the establishment of Oriental hierarchies in the countries of immigration. How can the local Latin Rite churches help the Oriental faithful to preserve their identity and cultivate their specific heritage without undergoing processes of assimilation? How can they help make visible and experienceable an effective unity in diversity?
We all have in front of our eyes the dramatic situations of these days, the bombs, tanks destroying everywhere in a tragic way, destroy people and destroy hope. There is a specific category in this sector, in this setting. We want to focus on it. It is a very small and fragile category made up of our brothers. It is the Eastern Catholic churches. They are located in areas where there's war. They risk disappearing. An Eastern Catholic Church is not an ethnic minority. It is not a church which just speaks another language. It is a church, as it is, in full communion with the successor of Peter. So these are churches. They have drawn from the environment and from the words of Jesus Christ, and they have brought these words to us. Their loss and the loss of their brothers who are not in full communion with the successor of Peter would be an irreparable loss for the church. Our group has this task. How can we ask the Latin churches who are stronger, the Latin Church who is stronger and more organized, to help our brothers to live in a better way, especially after the heavy migration from their home countries. We have here their patriarchs. They can explain that for some churches, the highest percentage of the faithful is in diaspora and not anymore in their home countries because their countries are war-torn. Our mindset for many Catholics, not only lay people, lay Catholics, is to identify Catholicism with the Latin Church. This reality is considered, when we know that they exist, as something with a folklore element. This phenomenon is producing, you can imagine from a humanitarian point of view, and destroying the original community. This is producing important phenomena from the canonical point of view. There is a growth of request, demand to pass the rite to the Latin rite, that is from the Eastern rite to the Latin rite. Oh, time out. The method. I will not quote the words of the Holy Father, who invites us to carry out this work. He is here, so he is an icon, so we don't need to quote him again. I will talk only about the methodology. We have had a meeting of experts to see how to stop the phenomena, which right now are very worrying. We have sent a questionnaire to the members of the commission or of the group and to other people with some concrete issues to address on how the Latin can help the Eastern churches not to die and to bring their contribution, their input. We are expecting the responses to this questionnaire. The responses will be examined by the group. Then the responses will be sent to the single Eastern Catholic churches for their observation. This will be channeled in a draft which will be submitted to the plenary assembly for the dicastery for Eastern churches and then submitted to the Holy Father. Allow me to add a few words concerning the coordination with the juridical commission. I have learned, I was really surprised, happily surprised, that there are already some topics under study. Just focus on this, please. Do not make the juridical norm come before the theological maturation and the pastoral consultation of the churches. Otherwise, we make the same mistake we have done in the past.
Grazie a lei, Eminenza.
Thank you, Your Eminence. Another very important point in the relations section is the one concerning ministries in the Church and the relations between charisms and ministries. This is where the work of study group number 5 comes in, and it will be presented by His Most Reverend Eminence Cardinal Vitor Manuel Fernandez, Prefect of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith.
In the Church, charisms and ministries have an equal dignity. The charismatic and ministerial dimensions of the Church are neither opposed to each other, nor are they overlapping. However, the synodal journey has highlighted the need to deepen the theological understanding of their relationship from a missionary perspective. This would lead to a better understanding of the ecclesial roles and ministries that do not require sacred orders for the charisms present in the community to flourish. It would also contribute to a better understanding of how a synodal church in mission can promote and support the participation of all the baptized in its mission in different contexts. Within this perspective, one would need to consider carefully the very urgent question of the role of women in the life and guidance of the Church.
In dialogo con la Segreteria Generale del Sinodo,
in dialogue with the General Secretariat for the Synod, and also the request of the Holy Father, the Dicastery for the Doctrine on the Faith has decided to elaborate on the role of women within the Church, and in particular their participation in decision-making processes and the leadership of communities. We will also study the specificity of sacramental power, the relationship between sacramental power and the ecclesial ministries needed for the care and growth of God's holy people with a view to mission, the origin of ministries, the charismatic dimension of life of the Church, ecclesial functions and ministries that do not require sacred orders, all orders as commitment to service. We will follow on the lines of Pope Francis's own insights, particularly from Evangelii Gaudium 103-104, Corrida Amazonia 99-103, and Antiquum Ministerium number 3. The access of women to diaconate will also be considered. The most useful conclusions will be then stated in the document. We know very well what's the position of the Holy Father that does not consider the question to be mature. There's still open the possibility of an in-depth study, but there are other questions that need further elaboration before talking about female diaconate option. Otherwise, the diaconate will end up becoming a sort of consolation for certain women, and the most decisive question of the participation of women in the Church will be neglected. In the last few months, the study has set out a particularly interesting way forward to analyze in depth the lives of some women who, in both the early and recent history of the Church, have exercised genuine authority and power in support of the Church's mission. This authority was not linked to sacramental consecration, but an exercise of vitality of the people of God, may be more decisive than the limited tasks of a deacon. It is a reflection on the expansion of the ministerial dimension of the Church in the light of a charismatic dimension, suggesting that the recognition of charisms or the establishment of roles are not necessarily linked to sacramental power. We are thinking of figures such as Matilde of Canossa, Hildegard of Bingen, Bridget of Sweden, Catherine of Siena, Joan of Arc, Teresa of Avila, Juan Inés de la Cruz, Mama Antula, Anne Seton, Maria Montessori, Armida Barelli, Madeleine de Brel. It will be equally important to listen to women that live in far-off places. We would like to express our gratitude up front if in Africa or in Indonesia people will send us reports about the role of women, not to decorate reflections with these examples, but this is just to make sure that the pastoral practice paves the way for an in-depth study. In the light of these beautiful testimonies, the question of women's access to the diaconate takes on a different perspective. Meanwhile, we are trying to broaden the spaces for a female presence that is most decisive. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Your Eminence.
Grande spazio all'interno della sezione relazioni è dedicato al servizio.
The section on relations focuses also on the service of ordained ministers, bishops, priests and deacons, on the building of relations between themselves and with the rest of the people of God. And this refers to the work of study group number 7, which will be illustrated by a video by its coordinator, Monsignor Felix Ged, Bishop of Münster in Germany.
A bishop is
a brother and the father of all and for all,
the first proclaimer of the gospel,
the guide of the Christian community,
the defender of the poor and the vulnerable,
a judge for his community,
a teacher of God's love,
the guardian of the faith,
a living witness of discernment,
an animator of synodality.
A bishop is a simple man among his flock.
How can the relationship between the bishop and the local church be significantly deepened? How best to choose a bishop in a synodal church? How can more people be involved while avoiding inappropriate pressures?
Desidero presentarvi lo stato dei lavori.
I would like to illustrate the state of play of Group 7. Well, you can find it for the longer version in the cloud. Working groups, point 1. We are working on a way for the church to find pastors for synodal church in mission. In this regard, the following questions are being asked. What are the criteria for selecting candidates for the episcopate? How does the synodal involvement of the people of God work? How can discretion and transparency coexist? And last but not least, how can we place the listening to the Lord in the first place? Point 2. We are working on the question of the ad limina visits. How can they be renewed in a synodal church in mission? Point 3. In connection with Group 7, there's a subgroup working on the judicial role of the bishops. In addition, there's connection also with Group 8 that is working on the question of the representatives of the Pope. That there are many important highlights, but I don't want to talk at length. You can find the full document in the cloud. Well, further steps. I would like to mention 3 points. The working method, the expectations of the people of God, and fundamental questions. So, The working material, the contributions received by the following groups and institutions. First of all, this Synodal Assembly in all its stages, secretariats, working groups, bishops' conferences, and all the other national and international assemblies, the structures of the Eastern churches, the international groupings of episcopal conferences, the synthesis report, and finally, the experience of civil society, which often addresses similar questions regarding the leadership roles. Second, expectations of the people of God. We can sum them up in 3 points: greater transparency, more attention to the reality of the local church, more involvement of the local church in selecting candidates. We have to make sure that there are no doubts regarding transparency and to live in full the mission of a synodal church. All this can be summed up with fundamental questions. What qualities must candidates for episcopal ministry in a synodal church and mission possess? How does the information process work? How can this be improved? For example, the questionnaire or the contribution of the nuncios. And how can cooperation between bishops' conferences and the apostolic nuncios be improved? And how is it realistically feasible to have a greater participation of the people of God in terms of accountability and transparency? And finally, initial and ongoing formation of those called to the episcopate. How should this take shape? A consultation with the episcopal conferences will be important to learn about their experience and their expectations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Monsignor Glenn. Within this framework, study group number 6 deals with a particular aspect, and we will receive an update from Sister Brambilla, Secretary of the Dicastery for the Institutes of Consecrated Life and Apostolic Life.
Throughout the synodal process, the Church's desire for unity has grown hand in hand with an awareness of its diversity. The beauty and richness of the Church lies in its variety. Different flowers make up a beautiful garden. One of the greatest gifts received along the way has been the opportunity to encounter and celebrate the beauty of the Church's varied face. Male and female religious consecrated to the Lord, and lay organizations working in the world but not being of the world. How can we at the same time be many and one? How can pastors, consecrated men and women, members of ecclesial movements, and new communities stand together at the service of communion and mission?
The synthesis report asked for a deeper exploration of the way the relations between pastors, consecrated men and women, members of ecclesial movements and new communities can better explain themselves and stand together at the service of communion and mission. The work of Group 6 was broken down according to thematic pathways and was broken down into 3 subgroups that involved many more people with respect to the members that you've seen a minute ago. People coming from a different context, cultural, ecclesial context, from different charisms and experiences. In a synodal style work, the first subgroup focused on the relations between bishops and consecrated men and women. The second subgroup focused on the collaboration between bishops' conferences and conferences of superiors and superior majors. The third subgroup addressed the relations between ecclesial associations and local churches. Communion, hierarchy, and synodality will be the main keys to interpret these ecclesial relations: trust, fraternity, sisterhood, brotherhood, starting from a common baptismal condition in a distinction of roles. Differences and nuances have been identified in the way in which we experience the relation between bishops and consecrated life in the different regions and continents. In certain parts of the world, it is a fruitful and efficient relationship. In others, it is more challenging. There is no synodal approach, and consecrated life is seen mainly as a role to play. It is equally important to consider the variety of ecclesial contexts in which the associations are operating, ecclesial movements as well as new communities. Our commitment will focus on laying stress on the communal relationship among all, with the bishop being the unifying element of the people of God that's been entrusted to him. We will take into account the contexts that illuminate the relations between bishops and consecrated people, the ecclesiological context in which such relations are epitomized, so the fundamental principles of ecclesial communion, synodality, and mission that are guiding them. And finally, the practical implementation and the implications of the charismatic and hierarchical gifts and their coexistence. We will give a short presentation of the world of associations to illustrate their field of work, their relations with the bishop, elaborating on their specific responsibilities with respect to the ecclesial movements and new communities. Special attention will be given to the discernment of new institutes, of new forms of consecrated life and lay associations, with a special reference to ecclesiality criteria and discernment principles. And finally, the group is planning on giving room to listening of experiences, to identify concrete ways of implementing the ecclesiological and theological principles, and focus on communication to make sure it is accurate, motivating, and an expression of communion, synodality, and mission. Thank you very much.
Grazie, suora.
Thank you very much, sister. Now, the second perspective, the pathways supporting and fueling concretely the dynamism of relations. In this section, we focus immediately on the topic of formation to synodality, on which Group 4 is working on. Now we will listen and see the video by the coordinator of the group, Cardinal José Cobocano, Archbishop of Madrid.
For many in our societies, the figure of the priest has often lost its meaning. His natural authority is sometimes even besmirched. This often results in loneliness, suffering, depression, hyperactivity, inadequacy to deal with today's issues, loss of motivation, and burnout, if not even suicide. It is only through a seminary training based on a pastoral style of closeness, compassion, humility, and patience that one can form priests who know the smell of the sheep and who walk with them at their own pace. This is how the priest will touch the hearts of his faithful, win their trust, and make them encounter Christ. This is how they will witness the merciful face of the Samaritan Church.
Desde este grupo de trabajo hemos acogido como un regalo de Dios el poder encontrarnos y comenzar juntos una experiencia profunda.
As a gift of God, and we talk about the revision of the Ratio Fundamentali. This has paved the way for a lot of new themes, and we are happily working on our task, that is to study the ordained ministry and propose the revision of the Ratio Fundamentalis in a missionary synodal perspective. This is our mark. The most profound experience that we had is to have the opportunity to reflect together in our diversity about the priestly identity and to contemplate it from synodality, and we step by step are putting together the pieces of the puzzle and creating a wonderful picture responding to the 3 questions. So we present a series of considerations and orientations and creative proposals that may pave the way for dialogue in the assembly. First, we noticed that the Ratio Fundamentalis is still being received, and is work in progress and must unfold itself. First of all, we propose as a methodology to work out a preamble to the Ratio Fundamentalis containing the orientations of this Synodal Assembly about the ordained ministry for a missionary church, helping to implement the Ratio. And this is the document. Its horizon has the need to follow studying the ordained ministry from a missionary and synodal perspective. Each proposals that we present contain some common notes talking about the formation in seminaries. For example, the axis of formation should be the missionary discipleship, accompaniment to the mission, faithfulness to it, relation as a way to set up and define the different ministries in the church and the ordained ministry. And the people of God, the key of it, is the subject of the formation of the presbyters. This is our task, and this is our simple input for the people of God to continue journeying together under the guide of the Holy Spirit. Thank you very much.
Grazie da lontano, Eminenza.
Thank you from far, Your Eminence. A second important theme of this session is the process of ecclesial discernment, and there are ways to unfold them. And this is connected to study group 9, theological and methodological criteria which are synodal for a common discernment of pastoral doctrinal issues and controversial ethics. And Father Carlo Casalone, the secretary of the group.
The world is changing rapidly. The synodal journey has brought up several issues that may relate to how love and truth relate in daily experience, reflection, and conceptual elaboration of faith. The psalmist promises us that love and truth will meet, justice and peace will kiss. So, how, within this horizon of faith, can we, in the light of the revelation and living tradition, rethink the controversial questions in a path of shared discernment?
The first point concerns the framing of the task of our group. You have seen the video, the themes in the video. The themes are in the relationship between love and truth, the epochal crisis in which we live, our journey, synodal journey, Servar, call for a conversion of thought, a reform of practice in faithfulness to the gospel of Jesus. Unlike many different contexts, we think we can identify some points of the new paradigm rooted in the gospel, centered on the renewal of the way in which we receive tradition through a meek listening of what was since the beginning. This is the first letter of John. And as well as what is happening right now, at present day, according to his dialogical and historical intelligence of proposed by Vatican Council II, we are called to a concrete way to live the truth of the gospel, because it is expressed in the love of God in Christ. This is the way how through which we can see the Church, one and Catholic, in the being aware that in the practical doctrine, the Church is the place where the living tradition can express itself. In our work, we think that the question of how is fundamental. The decisive question, if we describe the Christian experience with one part, the eschatological end, and the other, the complex reality in which we live, the question can be formulated this way. How can we and should we articulate the two fires, the two foci of the ellipse that delineates the Christian experience, the focus of the eschatological end and the focus on the concrete, varied, complex, and challenging condition, that is the revelation of God, which is agape. In the meetings that we have held already, we have seen that it is so difficult to carry out our tasks because of the diversity of the sensitivities and the perspective, but we are convinced that this hard work can be a very instructive experience, not only for the group, but for the entire synodal journey. which is undergoing many difficulties. It was pretty easy to find a consensus, a general consensus, but it is more difficult to find the concrete steps to carry. How there is the insufficiency of concepts, the resistances, the tensions, and the way to understand the steps forward to reach a common goal, and emphasizing the diversities. The levels are three. The first level is the theological reflection, starting from history and narration to recognize the aspect of the good and promote the good according to the gospel in each situation, so that the message of salvation of all finds its central element. The second point, the discernment practices with some operational proposal. Point 3, phase 2, ethical questions or issues with the discernment criteria, drawing them from the general documents, that is from the social level, the common home, peace, fraternity, and conflicts vis-a-vis with which the gospel always expresses non-violent method, and then the meaning of sexuality, marriage, the generation of children, and care of life. Our journey is inspired by Holy Scripture in the complex warp and weft and in the unfolding of our way forward, our steps to be taken, our online meetings, but also 2 residential meetings. We have identified 2 experts. They will give us a biblical and sociological contribution as for the processes of shared deliberation.
Grazie, Padre Carlo. Si entra poi nella terza.
Thank you. Now, the third perspective, the places against the temptation of an abstract universalism. They talk about the concreteness of the context in which relations incarnate with their variety, plurality, and interconnection, and their rooting in the foundations of the profession of faith. Among cultures in which to incarnate the evangelical message, there is the culture of the digital environment, and this is study group number 3. And the coordinator is Professor Kim Daniels from the United States of America.
During the COVID pandemic, Pope Francis addressed the world facing an empty St. Peter's Square, but keenly followed by millions on television and the social media. The new digital culture which emerged in the last 2 decades has radically changed the way in which we live our humanity, including our religiosity. Today, people, especially the young, have learned to live simultaneously and seamlessly in both digital and physical spaces. Have learned to live simultaneously and seamlessly in both digital and physical spaces. How does the Church use and appropriate the digital culture? How can the Church give witness to God's love and serve human beings in the digital environment in addition to the physical one?
Good afternoon. Last October, this assembly recognized that our family of faith is called to go forth within the digital culture, the interconnected, dynamic global context created by digital technologies. You noted that digital culture is a crucial dimension of the Church's witness in contemporary culture. It is now indistinguishable from the sphere of everyday life. This represents a new missionary page in the life of the Church, allowing us to reach out to the peripheries, to those who are searching, and to those who have fallen by the wayside. Being present in the digital environment makes it possible to extend a hand to those in need right where they are, and in many cases, to be the first proclamation of the Lord to those who do not know him. To be a missionary synodal church and to more fully proclaim the gospel in these times, we must discern the opportunities and the challenges presented by this digital culture. Study Group 3 has been formed to address this, and on behalf of our study group, today I'm going to give you a brief report about our general approach, an update on our progress, and a preview of the work we have ahead of us. Our general approach is firmly rooted in the synodal method, emphasizing listening, discernment, and adaptation to help ensure that we incorporate a wide range of perspectives into our work. That work is guided by key questions focused on what a missionary synodal church can learn, how the digital mission can be better integrated into the life of the church, jurisdictional issues, and practical recommendations. We've made significant progress to date. Our work is organized along 3 paths. First, we've conducted an extensive review and synthesis of reports and data from previous synodal phases, providing a comprehensive foundation for our work. Second, we've initiated a series of listening efforts with an emphasis on inclusive engagement, and more will follow. We've worked to engage voices from youth networks and those involved with digital culture, including almost 1,700 participants from the Church Listens to You effort, those involved with the Dicastery for Communications pastoral reflection on engagement in social media, and those emphasizing online safety. We have many more to come, and we welcome submission of answers to our questions from others as well. Third, we are establishing several working groups that will focus on responding to our substantive questions in a more sustained manner. And finally, a preview of the work ahead. As we move forward, we will continue our listening efforts, and our working groups will proceed with their work as we seek to broaden our engagement and continue to follow a synodal approach. The last phase of our work will consolidate our findings into a report offering actionable recommendations to the Holy Father for enhancing the Church's mission in the digital environment. In conclusion, we know that we are called to witness to Jesus Christ in every culture. Today, we live in a digital culture, and so we must discern how best to reach that culture in all spaces where people seek meaning and love, reconnecting digital encounters with physical ones, weaving the communion that unites us, encountering people wherever they live, and especially reaching out to those who are most distant and most in need. We trust that the Holy Spirit will lead us on this path forward. And on behalf of Study Group 3, thank you for your efforts as you are gathered here this month. You are in our prayers. Thank
you. Grazie, Professoressa Daniels.
Thank you, Professor Daniels. Well, this notion of place can no longer be defined by geographical or spatial criteria only, but must be understood as a web of relations. This section also includes very important topics, for example, relations between the local churches within the universal communion, the role of association of churches, the role of the Synod, the service of unity. That is the responsibility of the Bishop of Rome. The work of study group number 8 on apostolic nuncios is set in this context. We're going to watch a video from the coordinator, His Eminence Cardinal Oswald Gracious, Archbishop of Mumbai.
Nuncios, as representatives of the Pope, hold a unique task in enabling better communication between the local churches and the universal church. How can their ministry be envisioned in a missionary synodal church governed by a culture of transparency and accountability as part of promoting co-responsibility? How can they serve the development of synodality and collegiality in entities that connect local churches in ecclesiastical provinces with metropolitans, episcopal conferences, and continental gatherings? How can nuncios help to consolidate the bonds of communion between the local churches and the Pope, enabling him to know better their needs and aspirations?
This is a summary report of Study Group 8, the role of papal representatives in a missionary synodal perspective. The last session of the 16th Ordinary General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops identified the need to evaluate the role of papal representatives from a missionary synodal perspective. Our study aims to align the ministry of papal representatives with the Church's growing focus on transparency, accountability, and co-responsibility, which are key to a synodal church. Our group is tasked with determining how nuncios can strengthen the relationship between local churches and the universal church, foster synodality, and collaborate effectively with episcopal conferences and other ecclesiastical entities. Our area of focus is the papal representative's role in synodal decision-making at every level, particularly in relationship to the bond between the local churches and the universal church. Enhancing the link between the papal representatives and local synodal structures, including episcopal conferences, the corresponding bodies in the Eastern churches, the metropolitans, and continental bodies. Reflection on how nuncios can better support episcopal appointments, interact with civil authorities, and facilitate transparency in governance in the Church. The study group adopted a synodal approach, focusing on listening to a wide range of stakeholders. These included papal representatives themselves, the nunciature staff, and church diplomats, presidents of episcopal conferences and the Eastern Synod of Bishops, major superiors, continental structures, authorities, lay in movements, and diocesan pastoral councils. We plan to use surveys and open invitations for responses, along with in-person dialogues during the 2024 Synod session this October. By the end of 2024, further steps will be identified based on the input that we receive. Our finding is that more than half of the papal representatives contributed to the synodal process already, expressing eagerness to reflect on their own role in fostering synodality. The key themes that have emerged include greater lay participation, the need for this, especially in episcopal appointments, cultural sensitivity in decision-making, and an increased transparency and accountability. There's a strong demand for the formation of nunciature staff with training in synodality, technology, and intercultural steps. Next step, The study group will continue to the listening phase before moving to discernment and consultation with other leaders. Further formation opportunities for papal representatives will be explored, and synodal gatherings for non-sister staff may be organized. We seek to redefine the role of papal representatives to align with the synodal missionary church. The focus is on improving governance through transparency, accountability, and a deeper connection between the local and universal church structures.
Anche se ci ha parlato
Even though he spoke to us through a video, we can thank him personally with our applause in person, because he's part of the ordinary council of the synod and so of our assembly. After the section on places, the Instrumentum Laboris concludes with a short conclusion, bringing us back to the horizon of sense of our journey as Synodal Church, but also Synodal Assembly. I think that the conclusive paragraphs of the Instrumentum Laboris, number 112, may help us today to carry out our task in the right way. Prophet Isaiah terminates his oracle with a hymn of praise to sing together, "Here is our God. In him we have hoped, so that he saved us. This is the Lord in which we have hoped. Let's rejoice for his salvation." As people of God, and now I add a Synodal Assembly, let's get together, let's join this praise as pilgrims of hope, and we continue to journey along the synodal path towards those who are still waiting for the proclamation of the good news of salvation. Thank you for your patience.
Forse possiamo dare un applauso anche ai 13 gruppi, no?
13 groups who have worked, and they still have to work a lot. Thank you very much.
Come ha sottolineato,
as Cardinal Hollerich said, the work of this group is connected to the synodal journey, especially to the synodal style that we as church are trying to learn to take up. This means that within them, they are called to facilitate the effective participation of all members. They are also called to remain open to a wider participation that of the entire people of God. Therefore, during the time in which the 10 groups will remain operational, as well as the canonical commission until June 2025, it will be possible for all to send input and contributions, observations, proposals. And if I say all, I mean all pastors and ecclesial responsibles, but also all faithful men and women, each group, association, movement, or community. The General Secretariat of the Synod, to whom the Holy Father has asked to guarantee the synodal method of work of this group, will collect the material it will receive, sending it to the group in charge. So, I ask you to tell about this possibility within your churches, easing the involvement of everyone, single individuals, groups, associations, study centers, whoever wishes to make an input, send an input. And this is the conclusion of our first General Congregation. We meet tomorrow morning. We begin with the prayer at 8:45. Then at 9, there will be the presentation of the first model, the introduction of it, and an explanation about the methodology. And then we will start our working groups work. So now, Your Holiness, we conclude with a prayer. And I wish you a pleasant evening. Concluding prayer.
Nel nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo. Preghiamo, fratelli e sorelle, per la pace tra i popoli della terra in questi tempi di guerre e violenze. Ricordiamo le vittime dell'odio e della divisione, i profughi, i feriti e tutti coloro che soffrono. Dio, tu sei la vera pace e non ti può cogliere chi semina discordia e merita violenza. Concedi a coloro che promuovono la pace di perseverare nel bene e a coloro che la ostacolano di trovare la guarigione allontanandosi dal male. Per il nostro Signore Gesù Cristo, tuo Figlio che è Dio e vive e regna con te nell'unità dello Spirito Santo per tutti i secoli dei secoli. Andiamo in pace.
And that is the end of this live broadcast of the first General Congregation of the second session of the 16th General Assembly of the Synod of Bishops, this Wednesday, the 2nd of October. Whether you've joined us via our Vatican Media app, or via our YouTube channel, or via Facebook, or via any local or diocesan radio station, including EWTN Television, Catholic Faith Network in America, Shalom World Television, Catholic Television, Luminous Radio India, thank you. And until next time,
10 years of sharing the peace of Christ. Shalom World, God's own channel.